Mr. Benaya. So Mr. Edwin will be sharing the community and non-experience perspective, including harm reduction programs and what real-world support for people who use drugs. Let's give him a round of applause.
So what I've done is I've got my stopwatch here just in case I go a little over. I'm going to try to behave.
You always go a little over.
I always go a little over. So I haven't started yet, but I'll try to be I try to cut it down, but eventually it's 27 on the slide. So anybody needs to time me out with this, let me know. Yeah, so I'm actually, I'm not very sure about my affiliation with Sharia. But I am doing my PhD here at Dr. Harvey at the same partner club. I can say that. Yes, I'm a clinical psychologist. Most of my work has been around substance use disorders, addiction, in various NGOs, private settings, residential settings, outpatient settings. So a lot of that has been in substances, behavioral addictions, and sometimes co-occurring addictions as well. So another bit of a disclaimer is that whenever I speak, I get a little dry and a bit husky, so excuse me, and I will have some sips of water every now and then. So the topic today is decriminalization, and I was given this topic to speak about the community perspective on lived experience and harm reduction and recovery and drug decriminalization. Initially, I was wondering whether would it be wise to look at a reflection. And then when I thought about it again, I think that there might be more worth looking at the impact it has on people who actually use substances, people who have used substances, gone through the system. What do people actually really need in this process? You see, the challenge is that over the years, so much of propaganda, I forgot to set the timer, right? It's the ADHD. Over the years, so much of propaganda, the moment someone says drug or substance, what comes to mind? I think it was one of our colleagues earlier said that if a friend of yours or family member uses a drug, what are we going to look at? Treatment? Or, I can't remember what's the other option. But no, what? Why even treatment? If someone is using a drug or substance, do they really need treatment? Right? Because we have come to associate substance use with addiction. And I'm not going to go through the whole definition in a room full of doctors. You all know this very well. Yeah? But what I'm actually doing here, why I brought this slide is that if you look at that and there, and the moral feelings, so on and so forth, you'll see that that's how people conceptualize the theories behind addiction. See, this definition by NIDA, addiction being a chronic relapsing brain disease, was only discovered in about the early 1990s, right? Before that, people assumed that, if you use drugs or you use substances, you must be a bad person. It's a willful choice. You need malas kerja lah. For those who are not Malaysian, they don't want to work, they just want to go and get high, get hedonistic. So what do? Let's put them in prison, let's punish them. So how you look at addiction, how you conceptualize it, will determine how you go about treating it. I think doctors are experts in that, right? So we have different ways of looking at addiction. We have the moral failing model, which is what we adopt here. We have the disease model, a lot of NA people who are in NA kind of adopt that, stating that we are born with a certain disease. So if I use substances, confirm I will have an addiction. We have the medical model, which is what you guys do, biomedical, right? Neurological, medication to kind of treat. You have the people like me who want to look at, what trauma do you have in your life? What underlying issues are there, right? Let's sort of get into that addiction or substance use being secondary. And you have the learned behavior, the therapeutic communities, people kind of change behaviors, give you roles. So what I'm trying to get is what's really important here is that in 1991, we've come to realize that addiction is a disease. Yet, in so many parts of the world, we are still punishing people because we think that they are lazy. And I think what message that drives back is that we sometimes need to look at ideologies and agenda versus the facts. Yeah. the reality is this: not everyone who uses substances develops an addiction. If you look at the definition earlier, addiction is used despite problems. I love this slide by Prof. Adiba. It's a little bit outdated. I need to maybe change the figures. I think it's between now 10 to 12%, yeah, of people who may have a substance use disorder. But if you look at that, across the spectrum, only a small number, 10% of people who use all substances develop problematic use. And if you look at the thing at the bottom, you even have it on the spectrum. Substances can even be beneficial, right? When we are tired in the morning, I have a cup of coffee, I have another cup of coffee, I'm coming here, I'm like, should I have another? Don't, you'll get anxious, man, right? So, it can also be beneficial. But, sometimes what happens is that you develop dependency, you start using more and more, and, that's when it might become problematic. Looking at it on a spectrum, even the DSM, if you look at the DSM-4, it was either substance misuse or harmful use. But when they sat together again to do DSM-5, they said, well, no, that's not accurate. We need to look at it on a continuum. So out of all the 11 criteria that are there, now this is my grievance is here. I have never met anyone with a mild substance use disorder. Why? If mild, they won't come for treatment, you won't see them, right? Every now and then you go on a little bit of a binger and stuff, right? So that's a little bit of my grievance. But generally, everything points towards here. Not all substance use is problematic. And that is where I think we all really need to sort of sit down and settle down with that idea that most people use substances and they're okay. How many of us go out here, I'm in recovery here, how many people go out here and have a beer on the weekend? Maybe someone organizing this today says, oh, I'm so tired, let's go have a beer. And then at 12 o'clock he says, hey man, I got class tomorrow, let's talk. Yeah. The person with the addiction is going to go, 12, yeah bro, one more. Until it's 5 in the morning, never mind lah, one last one. Come to class, prof says, I can smell you man, what's been up? So it's problematic in that sense, yeah? And not only that, so we know that substance use exists on a continuum, but we also know that there is a progression of use. For those of you who might be a little bit younger like us, yeah, we'll remember that there were these PSA advertisements when some of us were just a little bit younger. Yeah, this guy cycling on a bicycle, and you have another person that's got a syringe, and then they come and poke you. And the idea behind that was, you use once, you are hooked, right? This is way before the 90s. And in actual fact, that's what people believe. There is a chemical hook. You use once, you are doomed into an addiction. But the reality is that, like all diseases, it is progressive. In the early stage, it's experimental. Or come to uni, right? Now masters, okay, maybe degree time. Hey, let's try this, let's try that. A little bit of cannabis, a little bit of math. Oh, math works for doing assignments. Cool. Having some beer, the lady smiles. Having some beer before I go into the club, I feel a bit warm. I can sort of socially lubricate. That's here. I learn different things. Recreationally, I do it. Yeah, the next stage is circumstantial, which means there's intention. Every time I want to go to the club, have a few beers, then I have the confidence to talk to a girl. It's intentional. So only when I want to go to the club am I going to drink. Now, if somebody progresses to the next stage, they say, oh, confidence, maybe these classes are a bit difficult to come up and do this. Maybe I should just have a few drinks, a few packs before. So you start doing it on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday. Now what's happening is that you are learning to cope with your anxiety by using a substance. Now is where you may develop a dependency. And if that continues, then you develop a compulsive use. So basically, in a nutshell, the fact that addiction or substance use is progressive. Where do most people stay along this progression? Yeah. Most people would be here. Some might go up there, but generally you're going to be here. Okay, have a sip of water. When we work, I don't know how many of you may be trained with a psychology background, we do a functional analysis, not so much what you use. I want to know what you use so I can anticipate the withdrawals. I want to know what you use so I can sort of anticipate will there be any sort of adverse reaction, so on and so forth. But why do you need to use substances is key. When I can understand why, then maybe we can look at maybe replacing some of those reasons, right? So generally people use substances one for fun. It feels good, what? So they use it for fun. Another reason people use substances is to improve their performance. And thirdly is self-medicating. This is Kantian, a very, very sort of famous researcher who came to the conclusion after doing studies that many people who develop addictions are using it to self-medicate some form of pain. And when we're talking about pain, we're talking about, I can't cope with life, or I can't cope with, like what Dr. Hassan said earlier, I have depression, I have anxiety, I may have PTSD. I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to go home to a family that's all fragmented. I don't know. I don't know how do I go to work, how do I come to class and deal with my lecturers and say, look, I'm struggling. So, smoke a bit of meth, use some alcohol, right? So people use it to cope. And people who use substances to cope are more commonly, you'll see them when they already are struggling with addictions, more commonly than not, they're using it to cope. Underlying factors, I'm not going to go over this in the interest of time, I think Dr. Azim's done a good job, but to note that almost 50% of people who use substances, I stand corrected, 50% of people with a substance use disorder have got at least one co-occurring mental disorder. That says a lot. So when we take someone like that, who's got depression, anxiety, PTSD, who's sort of using it to cope, and I put you in prison, what is the message I'm sending you? You're not even worth the treatment. Forget being worth the treatment. They don't even know what's going on. Right? What happens exacerbates the mental health. I mean, I think this is self-explanatory, so in the interest of time, we'll skip that here. And I'm going to come to recovery. So we looked earlier about what is substances. Not all substance use is addictive. Addictive is when there are problems and they continue using it. It is progressive. If you talk to the people with lived experience, lived and living, slightly different. The lived experience camp are those people who are sober, usually, so they've gone through the whole process. They don't want to use anything. Some go on to the extent that, even they go to the dentist, they don't want any painkillers, and I don't know, dentists will probably say, don't be crazy, don't be a hero here. But to that extent, people with living experience are people who still use, right? They may work in the field. There are people who may still be using substances, right? So generally we want to differentiate the both. Recovery is the term you hear more commonly with lived experience. The abstinence gang, the treatment gang, you talk about recovery. But recovery is actually a broad concept. And if you look at SAMHSA's definition, this is the revised definition. It does not include or mention anything about substance use. It talks about recovery being a process of growth, a process of change, where people sort of start seeing improvements in their health, in their wellness, have autonomous decisions for what I want to do with my life, and therefore live up to be my full potential. Importantly, it is a process, not an event. So one episode of treatment is not going to do it. One episode of putting someone in prison or finding them will also not do it. So this is what recovery is here. And if you look at wellness, WHO's definition is quite clear here. If you look at the second box, it is more than the absence of the disease. We are looking at how fulfilling is my life. How fulfilling am I emotionally? Can I control my emotions? Right? Am I financially happy? Am I satisfied with my financial situation? Do I have good social connections? Am I happy with my job progression? Right? These are the domains of wellness, right? That we all look at eventually become the quality of life. How content am I with my life? If you also look at recovery, and this one, more pertinent towards people who have an addiction. Yeah? Maybe they've had severe addictions, they've had to sort of compromise certain values. Right? Recovery is also a process of where people learn new values. They start learning, they start experiencing a spiritual shift. It's no longer about me, it starts to become more about us. They become a different person and they eventually get to sort of live up to their full potential. So what is recovery supported by? We know what is recovery, it's a process of change, right? We know what are the domains that kind of make up recovery and wellness, but what supports recovery? It's health. Having simple stuff, good physical health, having a place I can go back home to, having purpose, waking up in the morning knowing that I have something to do, I have something important, there's some meaning, there is community as well, right? I am part of something greater than myself. And even if you look at the work by David Best, who's actually a recovery researcher as well, they're pretty much very similar. Yeah. If you look at what influences recovery, this is a systematic review by Dini. It's the CHIME framework. How connected do I feel? Right? Do I feel a sense of connectedness with other people? Is there hope in my process? Right? Do I have an identity? What is the meaning of my addiction, my mental health, and am I autonomous and empowered here? The other thing that promotes recovery is recovery capital. Recovery capital is pretty much what it says. It is the capital to help you support, enhance, and sort of strengthen one's recovery. So you have things like personal recovery capital, values, do I have a bank account, do I have a car, societal recovery capital, are my loved ones involved in my process, my recovery process, is the community involved. You also have some negative barriers and negative recovery capital that sort of blocks and hinders everything. Now if you look at incarceration and substance use, remember all those things earlier about recovery. If you put someone in prison, firstly I want to point out that if only 10% of people who use substances have got an addiction, and then you want to put them in mandatory treatments, whether it's ADK mandatory treatment or in prison, now you're risking how many percent? I mean, obviously I'm not a stats expert, but there's a high likelihood that you're going to get people who don't have a substance use disorder that are going through the system. Worst of all, like Dr. Hassan said, there is absolutely no treatment. Remember that people who struggle with substances are using it because they don't have a better way of coping. They don't know how to deal with stress. They don't know how to deal with life. They don't know how to manage cravings. Going into prison, there is absolutely none of that. Yeah? What we also do is very condescending to say that people who use drugs, you're not capable of making any decisions. Let me make the decision for you. What happens at the end of the day, society buys into that idea as well. So at the end, everyone's going to say, yeah, better put him in. So when I think one of our colleagues was asking that question, if it was my loved one, first thing came to my mind is that I'm sure there are some that will say, take him in, because he's causing a ruckus at home. They don't understand that. So they have actually sort of been indoctrinated into that idea as well. Yeah. Obviously there's the stigma. But one point, like what Dr. Hassan said, very importantly is that help-seeking behavior in the future will become a problem. To me, I work in different settings. Long-term settings are 6 months, 2 years, outpatient, private centers that are 1 month. Yeah. And I used to wonder, 1 month, what are you going to get from that? A bit of motivation? No, sometimes it is about the hope, the experience of getting better, looking at my peers get better. So even if it doesn't work this time, that's okay. There's always an opportunity to come back. If you don't want to see me, it's alright. Go and see Dr. Hassan. Yeah. As long as help seeking is there, but if my mindset is programmed that help is punishment, I ain't going to do it. Right? So that's one of the impacts of incarceration. I think it's one Dr. Hassan mentioned. studies done, 31 days, people have relapsed. Impact of incarceration on mental health. Nobody's going to think about anything else other than survival when we are there. And worst of all is that you kind of reinforce the trauma. Right now, someone has caught you and put you in, and you're isolated from your family, you're totally emancipated, loss of autonomy, no meaning. Is that going to help? No. All it's going to do is say that I'm in more pain and I need to medicate myself more. And how will I do it? The best way I know how. So what is the impact of decriminalization? First and foremost, we all know institutionalization. You get into an institution long enough, I absorb those values. I like it or not. Kill or be killed, but survival comes first. I need to be tough. Eventually, it becomes part of my personality. The revolving door, one of our colleagues said earlier, with a lifelong record, I can't work. And if we go back again to the factors that promote recovery and wellness, I need purpose, I need a job, I need meaning, I need community to kind of support me. And when I go through that prison, the mill of prison, all of that's taken away. Society ain't going to look at you twice. Getting a job, people aren't even going to, you can't even walk through the doors. It's going to be screened off a document. How are they going to support themselves? We kind of push people lower and lower and lower, and then kind of exacerbate the substance use. And eventually,
Ashwin, I think the topic of this one is impact of drug criminalization, right?
yes, you are right.
Not decriminalization. This is the impact of criminalization. Well,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
Thank you, Bhavani. So,
Sorry, because
anyone who
it's-
took photograph, please. Madam.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Bhavani.
No worries.
That's criminalization.
Yeah, it's a criminalization.
And also what happens is that the person takes a psychological hammering one time. We know chronic relapsing disease are 40 to 60%. Substance use disorders similar to other chronic diseases, your hypertension, diabetes, it's a 40 to 60% chance. And we also know that people go through maybe about 4 to 5 events or episodes of treatment or help or support before they actually get to some form of stable recovery that they are happy with. What happens when you put someone through a prison system once or twice? He takes a psychological hammering and he says, you know what, that's not for me. So if you speak to some people, they'll come to you and say, memang lah, I'm a junkie. They start developing that whole persona of being a junkie. And that becomes very difficult because identity needs to also shift in that process. Yeah. I don't think I'm going to go over this in the interest of time, but just very quickly, components of effective treatment has to be voluntary and autonomous, right? Cannot be condescending and say, okay, I'm going to put you here because I know better. There needs to be a variety of different kinds of treatment that is definitely evidence-based, and you have to work with a multidisciplinary team. If it is a complex case, straightforward, then you don't. So if you're looking at what are the alternative incarceration, this is the continuum of care, right? You have promotion, you have got prevention work, you have treatment, and you also have recovery over a long period of time. Look at that, right? How many things do you need to do? It's difficult. Prevention is difficult, treatment is difficult, recovery is difficult. But this works. It may be much easier to just say we have a problem and let's lock people up. But that's not really the answer. So if you break down the continuum of care, this is what you get. There are different interventions at different intensities. So it is giving the person what they actually need. That's why it's individualized care. From brief interventions to outpatient treatments to intensive outpatient to residential. And if you look at this one, the quadrants of care, just very quickly, so like quadrant 1 looks at less severe mental disorder, less severe substance use disorder. Recommended intervention, primary health care. Quadrant number 2, maybe more severe mental health, less severe substance use, also primary health. Quadrant 3, less severe mental disorder but severe substance use, now we are looking at residential. But look at our treatment settings here, whether it's NGOs, private, mostly go directly there first. And if you look at the most severe quadrant 4, severe mental disorder and then severe substance use, only then you're looking at inpatient. And I'm not really sure why they put jails and prisons there, but you're looking at institutionalization only there. All right, very quickly on harm reduction, I think everyone sort of covered it, but just what I want to touch on harm reduction is that usually we think harm reduction either is along the continuum. I think harm reduction needs to be across. Is that correct? Across, it's across the whole continuum of care. Harm reduction approaches can work anywhere along the line here. The one thing that I want to sort of go into harm reduction that possibly is not medicalized is the moderation. From a psychosocial perspective, we can also work with people to limit the frequency of how much they use, reduce the intensity, and also reduce the quantity. If you come back here, we are back here. Here. What we want, if somebody wants to moderate harm reduction and manage, is to bring the use here. Can they manage it here? Right, so it becomes intentional. A little bit controversial, most people don't really work from that perspective. Most people work from an abstinence-based perspective here. So why harm reduction and recovery? Because we need to meet people where they are. How many of us here have tried going to the gym? Try controlling diet. I'm guilty. I can't, right? After 20 years of doing something, people may need to take it gradually here. And we also need to work with what's important for the person. If you look at recovery, where's the substance use there? We're looking at all the other areas of a person's life that give them meaning, that give them purpose, family, work, friends. Also the fact that any change is good change. So just imagine like Dr. Hazin's patient or the wife, after 6-8 months you get caught and you're back in prison again. I mean, that's so demotivating. So look at small changes. It's my last slide. I don't know, Palani, are you familiar with the Taski's work? I think Ines has brought him here. I'm sure you are. So he's got a model, integrated harm reduction therapy, a 7 kind of step model. But what I like about that is that if you look at the bottom, it says he allows the client to choose their relationship with the substance. That is actually key. When I have a relationship where everything is about you, substance, 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 then I have a bit of an obsession, I have a bit of a dependence, I need you. But allowing the client to kind of define that relationship, so then they start looking at substances differently, they start looking at using differently as well. All right. Okay, very quickly, views on the community of harm reduction and abstinence, just 2 minutes. I think that it's obviously very polarized. You get people from the harm reduction band camp who are 100% harm reduction. You get people from the abstinence band camp who are only 100% abstinence. I mean, if you ask me logically, you meet, what works for the people that we are working for. Some people can't moderate if they have underlying psychiatric co-occurring, if they have history of psychosis, if they have schizophrenia. He can't moderate cannabis, he can't moderate methamphetamines. There is no way. We know that it's not going to happen, right? Then we don't look at that option. But where that option is possible, we need to be able to provide, I think, a menu of options and let the people we work with or the people who use substances decide what we need. So ideological differences is, I think, where we are. All right, I'm not going to go with the parting thoughts. I'm going to leave that to Palani, I think. All right, just one thing, I think that we should not demonize substance use and look at it for what it is. At the end of the day, substances like tobacco, substances like alcohol are known to cause more harm and more damage to people. The only difference is that, the politicization. Yeah, and that's the bottom line. So I think we need to look past our ideologies and look at what works. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aswin, for the heartfelt and informative presentation on the continuum of care, harm reduction framework, community perspective, and also life experience from his personal and professional personal experience. So I hope we can help the people who use drugs with more empathy after this. So now we will now proceed to part 4, ethical and social justice perspective with Dr. Student to understand how drug policies impact individuals, families, and society. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Good evening, everyone. So today I will be presenting on the social justice and ethical perspective on the drug decriminalization. So we are focusing on Asian country, Malaysia, Singapore, and China. Despite a shared geographical proximity, these nations differ significantly in their drug policies, societal narrative, and ethical justification they present, ranging from cautious reform to strict zero tolerance enforcement. Malaysia, a cautious shift amidst the punitive legacies. Historically, Malaysia has enforced harsh punitive measures including capital punishment and corporal punishment for drug-related offences. However, in 2006, harm reduction strategy like a needle exchange program was introduced to combat HIV, hepatitis B rates among the drug users, signaling a partial shift towards a public health approach. Ethically, Malaysia stands in flux. The punitive ethics still dominate, viewing drug use as a moral and security threat. Public health ethics are gained grounds and emphasizing addiction as a health issue and requiring compassion. Human rights concerns are increasingly raised, especially over mandatory death sentences and their impacts in marginalized groups. Social justice challenges included disproportionate punishment for poor and vulnerable individuals, stigma and reintegration of barriers, and tension between access to treatment and criminalization. A recent legal reform in 2023 that introduced judicial discretion on death penalty cases reflect a cautious and yet meaningful shift. Next, we move to Singapore. Singapore, unwavering zero tolerance. Singapore drug policies are among the world's harshest and grounded in misuse of drug act. The state maintains a capital punishment for trafficking, mandatory sentencing, and rejection of decriminalization discourse. The ethical justification include harsh penalties are framed as a protecting the greater goods by the deterring drug-related arms, national sovereignty that government defends its policy against international criticism by accepting a local autonomy, a moral imperative they see the deterrence as a moral duty to preserve societal order. As social justice concerns are notable, the death penalty are drawn sharp criticism from UN agency and human rights groups such as Amnesty International. Their report of disproportionate targeting of low-level trafficker and drug use. Activism is heavily restricted and stifling on open level. However, Singapore does distinguish between the traffickers and users. The users are not involved in trafficking may be diverted to rehabilitation program, which reflects on us, though still heavily controlled approach. Next, we will talk about China. China, the historical trauma and the social order. China's zero tolerance policy deeply rooted in historical trauma of opium wars, which still heavily inform the public sentiment and policy. This drug control system is basically designed based on to achieve and maintain a social order, prevent re-addiction, and protect national security. The ethical framings include a paternalistic stance reflected pharmacophobia, which is education campaigns that instill the fear of drugs, and rhetoric rehabilitation exists, but The critics argues that the severe reinforced state of control more than individual well-being. From social justice perspective, a compulsory treatment centers face a major human rights allegation, including forced labors and lack of due processes. The widespread stigma and exclusion of drug users from education and employment, and the policy also hampers medical research limiting access to potentially beneficial treatment. And also, high relapse rate further question whether the system truly rehabilitates or simply removes the individual from public view. So in conclusion, all three nations are within the provisional framework. Their ethical justification and policy implementation and social justice impacts vary widely. Malaysia offers more human and health-oriented model. Meanwhile, Singapore continues to prioritize on deterrence and societal safety. And China remains deeply influenced by its historical experience and aim to uphold state authority and to strict control. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Student. So it's now time for our final guest speaker, Mr. Thalani Narayana, Public Health Specialist with the Malaysia Foundation Drug Policy Program. With that, I welcome.
Good afternoon. It's really nice to see you all here. I also did a public health course, and so I'm really excited to be speaking to you all again here. What happened to the questionnaire that you had at the beginning? I'm wondering what the answer to that questions are. How many of you think that that law enforcement is the best way to deal with drugs and drug use? You're just afraid to raise your hand. Okay. All right. I want to give a quick set of feedback. Number one, an incredible job to all of you speakers. Those 55 slides were amazing, particularly because you took on the challenge of looking at drugs from a colonialistic perspective, from a racial perspective, from an ethical perspective, and from a human rights perspective. Bravo. Bravo. You didn't just look at it from a law enforcement or a health perspective, you looked at it from all of that. So I was really, really impressed by that. Now, I'm going to just run through these slides very quickly because like Ashwin, I also tend to run over time. So you are very welcome to stop me at any time. So let's look very quickly at the global perspective, what we have. If you look at the UNODC report, every year they put out a report that's called the World Drug Report, right? Every year. Every year a group of experts come together and they put together this report. And every year they report that the number of people who are using drugs increases in the world. Every year. Every year they report the number and the type of drugs that comes into the world is created, increases every year. And every year, the number of people with problematic drug use also increases every year. Okay? This is the reality of the world at the moment. As you said, we have been dealing with the single conventions since 1961, not just 1988, since 1961. Since 1961, we've been dealing with this from a law enforcement perspective, right? We're dealing with criminalization perspective. So over the last 50, 70 years, we've been dealing with it from a law enforcement perspective, and this is the result. The result is things are getting worse, okay? Now, let's look at the single conventions. Just a quick thing to look, this is really important because Malaysia is a signatory to all of these conventions. 1961, 1971, and 1988, Okay? All of these single conventions, we call them all together, we call them the Global Drug Control Regime. Yeah? Because they all are about controlling drugs. They're all about criminalization. Okay? So we have an obligation to this. However, if you guys know about the Commission of Narcotics Control, there is a Global Commission on Narcotics Control, right? It sits in Austria. Every year there is a meeting. Every year our KDN minister or his representative will go there. Everybody from around 179 countries will come to this. Every year they go there, they just sign and say, yes, we should continue with these treaties. Except recently, more and more people have started saying, no, these treaties are not working for us. They are creating more harm than good. And especially the country that is leading this movement towards drug policy reform is Colombia. So Colombia, together with 60 other countries, came together this year at the Global Narcotics Convention and said, these single conventions are harmful. They're not supporting our communities. They're not providing any benefits to our communities. We need to change this. So Colombia led and successfully asked the UN to set up a new panel to review these single conventions. This is a major, major progress that we are making in the world, right? So there's going to be a 19-member panel who are going to sit up and review these single conventions and look at what is the impact they have committed in the world. Why Colombia? Because whenever we think about Colombia, we think about cocaine. We think about Pablo Escobar. We think about that's the producing country. Sebenarnya, in actual fact, only 5% of the drugs produced in Colombia stays in Colombia. 95% goes to America and Europe. And yet Colombia is the country that is always seen as the bad person who's producing the drug. They are the ones that America goes and sembor what do you call it? What do you call the pesticides? They throw pesticides and destroy the environment, right? So this is happening in the world. Let's look at what's happening in Malaysia. 2023, you look at the total number of penagih, which is people with drug issue problem, right? 2023 was 145,000. Do you know what it is now? 192,000. That's just 2 years, okay? 92,000. That's what's going on at the moment. If you look at what our government is putting out, every year we are saying, oh, drugs are a major problem. Yes, they are at an alarming rate. They're getting worse, right? Every year. Our current policy is creating this. Okay? So what we are doing at the moment is not reducing the problem, it's actually making the problem bigger and bigger. That's the first thing you need to consider. You need to consider is what are we doing now and what is the result? And if we're doing something great and it's producing great results, then why change? No need to decriminalize, just do the same thing. But what we're doing now is contributing to something that is worse for our people and our communities. That's the first thing that we have to look at. Second thing we have to look at is we are getting more and more drugs around the world, including fentanyl, including ATS, amphetamine type substances. So the drugs are getting more and more. Synthetic drugs are in use. The third thing you have to look at is even though our harm reduction program is one of the most successful in the world, and I'm very proud of our involvement in that. The increase in new substances, so if you look at here, the blue line is amphetamine type substances, right? Since 2010, you can see that it's growing up really, really quickly. Now, how does that impact on Malaysia? This is our HIV, and you see the orange bars, that's injecting drug use from heroin before, right? The blue and the green bars are sexual transmission. Do you know why it's going like that? It's because of amphetamine type substances. Many people use amphetamine type substances and engage in sexual conduct, unprotected sex. So we are seeing an increase in HIV among men who have sex with men and transgender communities and sex worker communities that is contributing to HIV. So if we are complacent, if we sit back and say, yeah, we've done everything to reduce HIV, and we don't address the issue of drugs, it's going to come back. HIV is continue to go. Now, our drug policy, like what you heard, 1952, 1952, sebelum merdeka. Okay, it's before our merdeka. 1952 is what we had. From 1952 to today, lots of people have learned lots of different things. Yeah, kita tahu, our pengetahuan, our knowledge around drugs, around addiction, around recovery, around HIV has improved a lot. And as public health students, I'm sure you've heard of several different things. Number one, it's a continuum. Ashwin has said, I won't repeat that. Number two, different drugs have different addictive levels, right? Not everyone who tries marijuana will become an addict. Not everyone who tries heroin will become an addict. No, only one out of one out of 4 or 5 will become addicted to heroin. Only 1 out of 10 of people who use cannabis will become addicted to cannabis. This is an actual study that was done from around the world. Okay? What does our law do? Our law does not understand this. Our law has not done public health masters yet. Okay? Our law is still in 1952, is still there, yeah, still in primary school, okay, not in masters in public health school. The second thing that you want to understand, that we understood in 1961 and then repeated again in 1984, is that when you talk about addiction, when you talk about drugs, there are 3 things you need to talk about. It's the drug itself, the person who uses the drug and their relationship, whether or not they have mental health issues, whether they are a woman or they are a man, their relationship with the drug is very different. The third issue is the setting, is the environment. The person who is using drugs in Terengganu is very different from the person who is using drugs in Kuala Lumpur. The person who is using drugs because they have to survive their sex work is very different from the 18-year-old boy who's going to a club. Yeah? The person who is rich has an access to treatment that's very different from the person who is poor. This is what we learn in public health. Our law still hasn't learned it yet. The next thing that we learn in public health is that there are stages of change. Francesca De Clementi, 1984, 1983. Francesca De Clementi said that every change in behavior needs to come through a contemplative stage. Do I want to give up my drug? Do I not want to give up my drug? Then you need to go into preparation, and then you take action, and then you have to maintain your sobriety before you relapse. Yeah? This is 1983. Our law is 1952. Hasn't changed, hasn't learned it yet. So, we need a new drug policy. We need a new drug policy because our knowledge is better. Because we are better than what we were in 1952. What we know today is better than what we know. We also need it because our current laws, putting more people in prison, a lot of people are incarcerated, prisons are overcrowded. We know that our drug laws is causing the increase in HIV. We know that our drug laws and our drug policy is very, very expensive. We know that our drug laws increases people's criminal record and destroys people's futures. Yeah? Our drug policy includes the registrar of criminals and undesirable persons, like you've heard before, and that literally is like a stamp on your forehead for the rest of your life. Once you're a criminal forever. Once you're an addict forever. It does not forgive, does not give people a second chance. We need to change that. We showed this slide before, prison overcrowding. We talk about cost. Just the amount of money that we are spending on prisons, on drug-related charges, is more than 1 billion. It doesn't include the urine test, doesn't include the cost mahkamah, magistrate costs and cost of the court, doesn't include puspen and the cost of mandatory treatment, doesn't include the cost of policing. If you count all of that, we are spending billions and billions of ringgit just on drugs. We can do better. We can take out people who are experimenting, using drugs recreationally. We can take all of those people out and move them to a civil administrative system or a public health system and not put people in prison. In Europe, people are closing prisons. In here, we're talking about creating more. Why? Why are we spending more and more in something that hasn't worked? So we can actually provide different people with different treatment facilities, yeah? So that's why we need to change. And as you talked about, there are options. You can do diversion, decriminalization, you can do decriminalization, you can do regulation and legalization. To be honest with you, if I was the president of this country, a prime minister of this country, and I know I don't have a chance to become the prime minister of this country and never will, but if I was, I would regulate all drugs. I would regulate all drugs. We know drugs are bad, right? Drugs can cause you harm. Drugs can also be beneficial because, sometimes they are good for social activities, but generally drugs are bad, and I believe that. If you think something is bad, why are you taking the business of that and giving it to a mafia? To make it even worse. Why are you doing that? Why are you supporting criminal networks? Why are you allowing a criminal network to produce drugs which has become more and more dangerous? More dangerous than what they need to be. Traditionally, we have used ketum, we have used opioids, and we still use opioids and heroin for many medical reasons. But when you give the production of that to a criminal enterprise, what they do is they put profit before people. And when they put profit before people, they will mix the drugs with all kinds of shit and create drugs that are worse for you, which is what's happening at the moment. But I am not the prime minister of this country, and I never will be. I am a public health person, and I am a rational public health person. To take our country from our dadah musuh negara nombor satu mentality to progressive, the first thing we could do is we could decriminalize drugs. Yeah? We could say people who are using the drugs do not need to be in prison, do not need to be seen as a criminal. Let's change that one thing first. Yeah, let's change that first. Let's not put the people who are using drugs who are at the bottom of the chain, like there's always the mafia, and then they have 4 people, they have 8 people, they have 36 people, and then comes to the guy on the ground, right? Now what we are doing is we are trying to cut the bottom, the echo, the tail, and let the kepala run around. Yeah? Confucius said that if you want to kill a snake, cut the head, not the tail. Okay? And what we are focused on is the tail. And that's what makes us want to change this. Yeah? That's what we need to do. These are the 3 laws that Dr. Haslim talked about. These are the sections that we need to change. And we want to let you know once again, apart from Colombia and the CND, decriminalization and regulation of drugs is now recommended by all UN agencies. Yeah? It's not just me standing here and say we need to change it. This is an evidence-based activism that is coming from even the UN. What is happening in Malaysia? Very often we have misunderstanding that when we talk about decriminalization, people think that we want to legalize. That's not what we are asking for. We're saying decriminalize it for use and minor possession. It is about removing criminal penalties for the person who is using. If we look at our law, if I put it into this, our law already says there is possession, there is intention to sell. It's already in our law. Yeah? Section 6, 12, 15 deals with the use of drugs and possession of minor amounts with the intention to use. Okay? So what we are recommending is that from this threshold onwards, we decriminalize this. We take away the criminal offense for section 6, 12, 15. Okay? And if you do that, section 39C also becomes decriminalized. This one, okay, continue. This section, you know, this is about the person who is selling. This is intention to sell. This is just use and minor possession. This is our threshold. Ini yang kita panggil threshold. So we need to set a threshold. The threshold at the moment is 2 grams for heroin and morphine, less than 5 grams for cocaine, less than 5 grams for methamphetamine. If somebody has that little amount, then that person should be seen as a user and not a dealer. They should not be going to prisons. That's what we're recommending. So you have a threshold. Above that threshold, drugs are illegal. Below the threshold, drugs are still illegal. We're not saying drugs become legal. That's another really important element of decriminalization. Whether you have a little bit or you have a lot, drugs are still illegal. However, if you have below the threshold level, you're considered you have the intention to use it. Above the threshold level, you have the intention to sell it. Okay? It's a really important concept for us to understand, because whenever we talk about it, we always get the question, oh, if that's the case, everyone can just carry drugs everywhere. No, we're saying it's still illegal and you have done something wrong, but instead of sending you to prison, we're now going to send you to a public health system or a health system. That's what we're saying. So, how would it work? If an offender is stopped by the police and they found that their person has a minor amount below that 2 grams, that person will be directed to a civil administrative process that we call DUPT, Drug Use Prevention and Treatment Commission, right? So this person needs to show up at this DUPT within 24 hours, and at the DUPT, there are caseworkers, there are counselors, there are doctors, such as the OSCAR program that Dr. Haslin was talking about, where they can be assessed. So the person will be assessed. Are you an experimental user? Are you a recreational user? Or are you a dependent user? And if you're an experimental user, you need counseling. If you're a recreational user or a regular user, you might need something even more. You might need CBT. You might need to go and do social work. If you're a dependent user, we are going to send you to drug treatment or rehab program. Okay? So this is a system that works, identifies you as a drug user where you're at, and sends you to the appropriate treatment. Yeah? It sends you to where you need to go. So at the DUPT, the counselors there, the commissioners there can provide a number of different sanctions or support or treatment that would be suitable for yourself. So you're understanding that this person is not an addict, is not problematic drug use. This person has different problems. Maybe they have mental health issues. Maybe they have abandonment issues. Maybe they have trauma issues, right? So they understand that, and then they can provide appropriate treatment for that person. Now, how do we set this up? We can set this up in many different ways. It needs to be multidisciplinary. We in Malaysia are talking about OSCAR and ADK officers. You know, in Malaysia there are more than 100 ADK officers everywhere in the country. Now we have more than 100 OSCAR across the country. We have, every district has this. All we have to do is that bring them both together. You know, like hopefully the resources can be brought together, they can resolve. Now, what are we doing? Since 2018, we have been advocating for decriminalization in Malaysia. So we've met with different ministers, and we've got some commitment to do decriminalization. My team is here. A small group of my team, part of my team is here. There's Safia, Shireen, and Farid. Oh, that's a nice welcome. I didn't get that. Very nice. Thank you for being here, guys. So what we do is we do work in 6 different areas. We build national ownership because we think decriminalization cannot just be a government issue. It needs to also be a pembangkang issue. It needs to be an opposition issue. We need to have a national committee. We need to revise the laws. We need to expand treatment because if we're moving people away from prison, where are they going to go? We need to build capacity throughout the country because the whole Malaysian society is still very, very berpegang teguh. Very stubborn about, only needs to send them to prison. That's the only way to deal with it because we have brainwashed them since 1952 to say if you have somebody who's a drug user in your family, send them to penjara, send them to pusat, send them to pusat serenity. That's the only way to deal with it. We have demonized drugs so badly in this country that everyone in Malaysia still believes that's the only way to do it. So to change that Malaysian mentality, to change that psyche, we need to do a lot of capacity building. So that's other things that we are doing. We're very lucky in 2024 last year, we have a national task force on decriminalization chaired by the Deputy Minister of Health set up last year. So we're very, very proud of that and very grateful to them. So since then we've been doing a lot of different work and I won't go into all of that. How am I doing for time? How many minutes do I have? 5? Excellent. Okay, I can do 5. All right. Okay, so one of the things that you talked about was Czech Republic, Portugal, and Germany, right? Those are all great examples. Then you talked about Singapore and China, not so great examples, but they are important to look at. We should learn from those who did well, and we should also learn from those who are not doing so well. So we've been looking at Portugal and several other countries. The man on the left here is Dr. Joao Goulart. Dr. Joao Goulart is the head of ICAT, which is like the AADK in Malaysia. Yeah? But ICAT in Portugal is part of the Ministry of Health. Now, in 1999, Portugal had a severe drug problem like we have in Malaysia. They had more than 100,000 people who have problematic drug use, more than 100. So they were really wondering what to do. So they went out, a group of experts led by him went out, studied the drug policies from everywhere, came back and they wrote a report, and then the report said, we need to do decriminalization. We need to decriminalize drugs, all drugs in Portugal. Because, number one, people need to go into health and treatment, not into prison. That the prison is recycling people. Yeah, it takes them in, sends them out, and then takes them in again and spits them out. It's a recycling mechanism, not a treatment mechanism. Prison is not a solution. It's not a rehab center. It's just a cage, an underfunded cage. That's what we're doing. We're putting our brothers and sisters in underfunded, overcrowded cages. So they decided to change that. Number 2, they said that because if you put them in prison, HIV, hepatitis, tuberculosis can increase, and that's what's happening. They also said that if people are afraid to come forward to receive treatment, then they won't come forward to receive treatment. They will wait until, from the time they experiment, recreational, regular, they know they have a problem, they need some help, but they're so afraid to come and talk to their doctor. By the time they are seen, they are problematic drug users because they have been using in silence, they've been using at home alone, that their drug use has progressed to addiction, yeah, to problematic. So since then, we went again, Dr. Haslin, myself, sorry, Ashwin, we didn't take you. Dr. Haslin, myself, and 11 other people went to Portugal in May and to understand what's happening in Portugal. And here's the interesting part. In 1998, they had 100,000 over. right? Today, they have 33,000. They reduced their problematic drug use by 66%. Now, do you remember the ADK slide that I showed earlier? Okay, that went from 142 to 190, 145 to 192 in just 3 years. Okay. Number two, they had 1% of the total population of Portugal had a drug use problem. 1%. 1% of the population was using drugs. Today, that population is 0.3% who uses drugs. Okay, so here's an example, a good example of what works and what doesn't. So in our advocacy, because law enforcement and policing is the central part of our criminalization policy, we need to understand what the police are saying. The police are saying that, number one, it lowers crime rates. Number two, the police now don't have to look at the ikan yang kecil, like the small fish, so they can focus their resources on catching the big guys. Yeah. The third thing is, that it looks like the police are helping the society rather than just catching them and putting them in prison. Yeah. So this is what we understand, and this is what we do as an advocacy group that works on drug policy reform. Now, what can you do, my dear public health students? And you guys will come out and you will set the policies for this country. You will influence the policies of this country. The first thing that you should do is question everything. Question it. Question and say, what is the rationale for our law and our policy at this moment? Is it the treaties? Okay, the treaties are being revised. Is it the benefit for the society? Aduh, 70 tahun tak ada pun benefit. It's actually getting worse. What is it? What is the benefit of this? And now the second thing, as you questioned and you put up the question in there, is who benefits from this? Certainly not the poor people, because if you look at the prison, the poorest are the most affected. Look at proportionate sentencing and disproportionate sentencing. Dr. Hassan told you that drug use is a relapsing disease. People relapse all the time. Ashwin told you it's a relapsing disease. But our law says you relapse once or twice, you get 5 years and 3 rotan, 3 sebatan. You relapse 3 times, you get 7 years and 3 rotan. Even though we know that this is a health issue related to relapse. This is an addiction, it's about relapsing. And yet we have disproportionate sentencing compared to rape or incest. Why? The person who's using drugs is impacting themselves. Rape and incest affect other people. It actually has impact on other people. And yet our sentencing is so disproportionate when it comes to people who are using drugs. Death penalty. Until very recently, we put people to death for carrying a little extra from that threshold levels. You see Paneerselvam and Nagendran in Singapore being put to death penalty, right? They are couriers. They are not the mafia. They are the opportunists, they are the product of the opportunities that the mafia took over the poor people. Yeah? If Paneer and Nagendran were very rich from what they had done, maybe, just maybe I will think about it, differently. But Nagendran had mental health issues. Paneerselvam is not from a rich family. Putting them in to death, does it benefit any society? Does it benefit any family? Does it benefit any individual? It doesn't. Question everything. Get involved. Get involved in trying to talk about what is the evidence. Ask our politicians. Ask our politicians. Ask our neighbors. Ask, what is the evidence that this is actually producing any benefit to our society? Every public policy must be made with evidence. If there is no evidence, why are we going there? Very often in our advocacy, we hear people say, "Oh, but if we let people decriminalize, they will get more brave to use drugs." The evidence shows from the countries that have done this, that's not the case. I know that you are fearful. I know that you're worried. But the evidence shows that that doesn't happen. When we did harm reduction in 2005, I came back and, when I was doing exactly the similar job, doing harm reduction advocacy, when we were starting to do needle syringe program, everyone said, "Bodoh ke you? Gila ke you?" This guy is destroying his life because of the needle. The needle is killing his life. And you want to give him another needle? You want to encourage him to use? That was the question that was asked. Yes, your fear is valid, but look at the results. Look at the results in every country that had done it. And now, 10 years, 20 years later, we celebrate what we did in there. And that is what we need to know. Last but not least, my advice to you is say enough is enough. Enough recycling poor people. Enough putting people in overcrowded prisons. Enough spending billions and billions on programs that don't work and drug policies that don't work. Enough of doing the same things over and over again expecting a different result. Enough doing things that does not benefit our society. Enough. Thank you. Just one thing, Safia is doing a survey on public perception. So if you could participate in the survey and talk to Safia later as well about this survey, this would be extremely helpful for us. Thank you, Doctor, for inviting us once again, and to all of you for listening to us.
Thank you, Mr. Balani, for the insightful and powerful presentation. So, as a public health, future public health advocacy, let's be influencer and a change maker. And thank you to all our speakers for sharing the knowledge and life experiences and good ideas. As we are on time, so let's invite all the three invited speakers to the stage as we begin our forum and Q&A session. Mr. Ashwin and Mr. Balani, and Dr. Shan as our moderator.
Can you guys hear me at the back? How's everyone?
Good. How are you?
Doing very well. So I think the first thing that we should all do is to put our hands together, for fantastic. Balani, I think all of us here have gained valuable knowledge and insights to the work that you have done, and also to the the greater picture of the situation. Now, Mr. Balani, you mentioned about the question, the answers to the survey earlier. If you would just
There it is. Okay.
yeah.
I'll send them to jail. It's 16%. Okay. The minority fine is 16%. That's 32% already. Okay. Strokes dropped at 6%. Sorry. Okay.
Okay, but as usually when it will be okay if people come in without, say, knowledge perspective,
Absolutely.
right? Before classes, we hope that after this session we have actually got a better understanding of the situation and we have a better realignment of our thoughts, right? Okay, so in view of time, this is going to be a very succinct session. What's going to happen is I'm going to ask a couple questions and I'll open it to the floor, right? And I'm sure we've got plenty of questions, good questions over here. But I think one thing that I wanted to begin with would be the stage of the change model, because Vasily has mentioned that Balani, you do just be a background. So I have a background in psychiatry and I'm doing policy in industry communications right now. So this is where I'm coming, of course, with public health. So my perspective is slightly skewed in that direction. Now, we understand that essential business model, relapse is a core component, right? A core component. But unfortunately, our friends in the Ministry of Home Affairs may not understand this. And of course,